The barren world stretched endlessly before Vixara, a wasteland of ash and ruin beneath a darkened sky. Her ship, sleek and silent, hovered over the desolation as its scanners combed the surface below. The planet was a graveyard, its once thriving human colony reduced to skeletal remains of metal structures and crumbled stone. Fires smoldered in the distance, sending thin trails of smoke into the polluted atmosphere. This was not the first world Vixara had seen destroyed in the galactic wars, but something about this place felt heavier, as though the air itself carried the echoes of loss. Her lavender-toned fingers hovered over the control panel, her bioluminescent skin flickering softly as her thoughts raced. The scanners had detected something unusual, a faint biological signature, organic life. It was impossible, or at least improbable, for anything to have survived the devastation. Humans were fragile creatures, their biology ill-suited to enduring the harshness of such an environment for long. Yet the signal was there, pulsing weakly against the overwhelming static of death surrounding it. "Adjust course," Vixara instructed, her voice calm yet edged with urgency. The ship's AI obeyed, pivoting smoothly toward the coordinates. Her glowing eyes scanned the data on the screen, confirming what she already knew. The life form was small, weak, and clinging to the edge of existence. Something about its fragility gnawed at her, a feeling she couldn't quite name. The Luminal were known for their rationality and composure, yet as the ship descended toward the signal, Vixara felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest, a tension that felt dangerously close to worry. The ship landed with a faint hum, its ramp extending into the ashen soil. Vixara stepped out, her life form moving with grace, despite the oppressive weight of the planet's damaged gravity. Her tall, slender frame shimmered faintly in the dim light, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin shifting into hues of caution. She adjusted her breathing apparatus, though her body had already begun filtering the toxins in the air, a survival adaptation of her species. The ruins of the colony loomed around her, twisted beams and shattered walls jutting out like the ribs of some colossal, decayed beast. She moved with purpose, her glowing skin casting soft light over the debris. The faint cries reached her ears before her scanners could pinpoint their source. It was a weak sound, barely audible over the crackle of distant flames and the groan of collapsing structures. Yet it was unmistakably a cry, a human infant's wail of despair. Vixara followed the sound, her bioluminescent glow brightening as her heart quickened. She climbed over a pile of rubble, her violet skin catching the faint light of the smog-veiled sun, and entered what had once been a shelter. The interior was dark and crumbling, the walls blackened with soot. In the corner of the room, partially shielded by a fallen beam, lay the source of the cries. The child was tiny, swaddled in a shredded thermal blanket that barely clung to its frail body. His pale skin was streaked with dirt, his lips cracked and dry. He flailed weakly, his cries faltering as his energy waned. Vixara's luminous eyes widened as she knelt beside him, her tall form folding gracefully to the ground. For a moment, she hesitated, her mind racing. Humans were so small, so vulnerable. The thought of such a fragile life enduring this carnage was almost incomprehensible. And yet, here he was, a flicker of life in a place where none should exist. Carefully, she extended a hand, her glowing fingers brushing against the infant's cheek. He turned toward the touch instinctively, his cries softening. Vixara's bioluminescence shifted to a soothing blue-green, a natural response of her kind to calm, distressed beings. Her scanner confirmed what she already suspected. The child was dying. Starvation and dehydration had pushed his body to its limits. He had perhaps an hour left, maybe less. Her mind churned. Luminal physiology was vastly different from humans. She had no immediate means to feed or hydrate him. The logical course of action would be to place him in the ship's stasis chamber and seek help at the nearest medical outlet. Yet, as she looked at him, so fragile, so innocent, something inside her refused to accept that option. He wouldn't survive stasis in his current state, and deep within her, an ancient, almost primal instinct stirred. The Luminal were an advanced race, their biology capable of extraordinary adaptability. In emergencies, they could provide sustenance to other life forms through a unique nutrient their bodies could produce. It was a gift of evolution, but rarely used, for the circumstances requiring it were almost non-existent. Yet now, with this child's life hanging in the balance, Vixara felt her body responding instinctively. Warmth spread across her chest as her biochemistry shifted, preparing to sustain the infant's life. Gently, she lifted him into her arms. He was so light, his small body fitting easily against her chest. She cradled him as she sat back on her heels, her glowing patterns dimming to match the rhythm of his faint breathing. As she pressed him closer, the infant latched on instinctively, his tiny mouth seeking sustenance. Relief flooded her as she felt him begin to feed, his shallow breaths growing steadier with each moment. The bond was immediate, overwhelming. Vixara had spent years studying the ruins of civilizations, cataloging the remnants of lives lost to war and greed. She had always been a detached observer, a scientist collecting data. But now, holding this child, she felt something she had never experienced before: connection. The child's cries subsided, replaced by the soft rhythm of his swallowing. His body relaxed against hers, his tiny fingers curling against her glowing skin. She stared down at him, marveling at his resilience. He had survived against impossible odds, clinging to life with a strength that defied his fragility. Cain, she murmured, the name forming instinctively on her lips. In her language, it meant light found in the void. It was fitting, she thought. He was a spark of hope in a galaxy that had seen too much darkness. As she rose, cradling Cain against her, she knew her mission had changed. This was no longer about salvaging data or studying ruins. She had found something far more important: a life worth saving. The galaxy was vast and perilous, but she would face it with him. For the first time in years, Vixara felt purpose beyond her duty. Together, they would leave this broken world behind and journey into the stars where hope still lingered. The ship hummed softly as it drifted through the cold vastness of space, its interior bathed in the ambient glow of Vixara's bioluminescent skin. The patterns across her violet-toned body pulsed faintly, reflecting her state of mind, an intricate rhythm of focus and uncertainty. In her arms, Cain stirred, his small fingers clutching at the edge of her fabric-like outer layer. His breathing had steadied since she found him, though he remained fragile, each breath a whisper against the weight of the universe. Vixara gently placed him into the makeshift cradle she had crafted from thermal blankets and the ship's biothermal energy cells. The warmth radiating from it mirrored the comforting touch of another body, something she instinctively understood the child would need. She knelt beside him, her tall, slender frame folding with an elegance natural to her kind. She observed his tiny chest rise and fall, his face relaxed for the first time since she'd found him. A pang of something unfamiliar coursed through her, an emotion her kind rarely experienced. It wasn't pity. The Luminal were a species of scholars and protectors, their society driven by logic, empathy, and balance. They revered life in all its forms, yet this sensation was different, sharper, almost in. She felt responsible for this child in a way that went beyond duty. It was as though he had become a part of her, a fragile extension of her own light. Infants' vitals are stable, the ship's AI announced, its voice smooth, devoid of emotion. However, nutrition requirements will need adjustment to sustain his biological development. I am aware, Vixara replied, her tone clipped. She wasn't irritated by the AI. It was doing its job. But something about the sterile delivery of its observations grated against the warmth she felt looking at the child. He wasn't a data point to be managed. He was alive. Human infants require regular physical and emotional interaction to promote healthy development. Vixara raised an eyebrow, glancing at the child. Emotional interaction, she scoffed lightly. What is it you expect of me? Songs? Stories? Yet even as she spoke, she found herself reaching out, her glowing hand hovering above Cain's small, pale face. She hesitated, then let her fingers brush gently across his cheek. His skin felt impossibly soft, his warmth delicate. His tiny fingers twitched, reaching instinctively for the light radiating from her hand. Vixara let him grasp her finger, his grip surprisingly strong for something so fragile. "You fight," she murmured, her voice soft, more to herself than to him. "Even when the universe offers no reason to." Days passed, and Kane's routine began to dominate her existence. The demands of his care were relentless. Feeding him required energy her body had to replenish constantly. Her bioluminescent patterns dimmed more often as her body diverted resources to produce the nutrients he needed. His cries, sharp and urgent, pierced the ship's quiet at all hours, forcing her to adapt to his needs. At first, she approached these tasks methodically, as she would any other challenge, analyzing, adjusting, learning, but soon something shifted. When Kane cried, it wasn't just a signal to be addressed. It was a plea that tugged at her core, compelling her to respond with more than efficiency. She began to cradle him in her arms during feedings, humming soft, melodic tones that resonated through her chest. The songs were ancient luminal lullabies, relics of a culture that had long since abandoned the need for infancy. She hadn't sung them in decades, yet they came to her effortlessly, as though they had been waiting for this moment. Kane responded in kind. His cries softened at the sound of her voice, his body relaxing against hers as the vibrations lulled him into calm. He stared up at her with wide, curious eyes, following the shifting patterns on her skin. His fascination with light was undeniable. He reached for it whenever it pulsed brighter, his small hands grasping at the air as if trying to capture the glow. "You are drawn to it," Vixara observed one evening as she sat beside his cradle. Outside, the ship drifted through a dense nebula, its swirling blues and purples casting a mesmerizing glow through the view. Kane's attention was fixed on the display, his tiny hand stretching toward the vibrant colors. Vixara tilted her head, studying him. "Your people live in darkness, yet you reach for light. Perhaps we are not so different after all." The thought lingered with her. The luminal had evolved in symbiosis with light, their bioluminescent bodies a testament to their harmony with the universe. Humans, by contrast, seemed fragile, perpetually struggling against the forces of nature. Yet this child had survived when logic said he should not have. His resilience, his refusal to surrender, was its own kind of luminosity. One day, as Kane napped peacefully, the ship's sensors jolted Vixara from her musings. An alarm blared, the sound harsh and grating. She rose swiftly, her bioluminescent patterns flaring in response to the sudden tension. "Report," she demanded, her voice sharp. The AI responded, "Unidentified vessel approaching. Energy signatures indicate high probability of hostility." Vixara's jaw tightened. Her fingers moved deftly over the control panel, pulling up a visual feed of the approaching ship. It was angular, its dark hull bristling with weaponry. Pirates, she realized, scavengers who preyed on the weak in the aftermath of war. Her shields engaged automatically, the ship's energy field shimmering faintly as it surrounded them. Yet her heart raced, her thoughts consumed by a single question. Had they detected Kane? Were they here for him? The ship jolted as enemy fire struck the shields. Kane woke with a startled cry, his wails filling the cabin. Vixara moved quickly, securing him in his cradle and activating the ship's evasive maneuvers. The pirate vessel pursued, its weapons lighting up the void with deadly precision. Vixara's ship twisted and rolled, weaving through the nebula's dense clouds. The charged particles interfered with the pirates' targeting systems, but her own sensors struggled to maintain a clear path. She gripped the controls tightly, her bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically as her focus shifted. "You will not take him," she muttered, her voice low but fierce. A sudden idea struck her. The nebula was rich in ionized gases, unstable but highly reactive. If she could channel the ship's energy field into a controlled discharge, she might trigger an explosion large enough to disable the pirates without damaging her own vessel. It was a gamble, but she had no other options. Executing the maneuver required precision and nerve. Vixara guided her ship through the densest part of the nebula, luring the pirates closer. When the moment came, she released the energy discharge, igniting the surrounding gases in a brilliant burst of light. The pirate ship veered off course, its systems overwhelmed by the shock wave. As the explosion subsided, silence returned to the cabin. Vixara exhaled slowly, her bioluminescence dimming as the tension drained from her body. She turned to Kane, who had stopped crying and was now staring at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. "It's over," she said softly, kneeling beside him. She brushed a glowing hand across his forehead, her touch gentle. "You're safe." Kane reached for her, his small fingers wrapping around her hand. Vixara felt the weight of his trust, the silent bond they had forged in these brief but harrowing weeks. She smiled faintly, a rare expression among her kind. As the ship emerged from the nebula, the stars stretched out before them, vast and infinite. Vixara knew the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but as she looked at Kane, his tiny form cradled in the warmth of her light, she felt a quiet resolve. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead. For now, that was enough. The quiet hum of the ship had become a familiar melody to Kane. Now 6 years old, he moved with an easy curiosity through its glowing halls, his hands tracing the faintly shimmering walls that pulsed with bioluminescent light. His feet padded softly on the floor, bare and unsteady, but confident in their exploration. Vixara watched him from the central console, her gaze both protective and contemplative. Kane had grown quickly, as human children did, his body now stronger and more coordinated. Yet his emotions were something else entirely, raw, untamed, and sometimes overwhelming for her to decipher. For the luminal, emotion was balanced and measured, rarely allowed to overwhelm logic, but for Kane, every feeling burned brightly, unfiltered and immediate. Vixara had learned to adapt, though not without difficulty. "Where are the other humans?" Kane asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the soft rhythm of the ship's systems. The question caught her off guard. She turned toward him, folding her tall frame onto one knee so she could look him in the eye. His dark hair fell in messy waves over his forehead. His wide eyes filled with something more than curiosity, something sharper. "What brought that to your mind?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with caution. Kane hesitated, glancing toward the viewport where a vast expanse of stars stretched endlessly. "I dreamt about them," he said finally. "I don't remember what they looked like, but they felt like me, not like you." The words stung more than she expected. Vixara knew this moment would come, that Kane would one day question the world beyond their small ship. She had tried to prepare for it, but the truth was she didn't have all the answers. She straightened, her glowing patterns dimming slightly. "Your kind is scattered across the galaxy," she explained. "War drove them to the edges of known space. Some survived, others did not." Kane frowned, his small fists clenching at his sides. "Why didn't they take me? Why didn't they come back for me?" Vixara paused, weighing her words carefully. "They could not. What happened to you, what happened to your parents, was not your fault, nor theirs. The universe is vast, Kane. Even those who wish to protect one another can be lost in it." Her answer seemed to offer little comfort. He turned away from her, his gaze fixed on the stars. "I don't belong here," he said quietly. Vixara felt a pang of something she couldn't name. It wasn't rejection, not exactly, but a realization that the bond they had forged might never be enough for him. She approached slowly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You belong wherever you choose to be," she said. "But if you seek answers, I will help you find them." Later, Kane stumbled upon a room he hadn't been allowed to enter before. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a chamber lined with holographic archives. Luminal technology filled the room, smooth, crystalline interfaces that glowed softly with stored memories and data. At the center was a pedestal projecting a faintly glowing orb, pulsing gently like a heart. Curious, Kane approached the orb. As he reached out, it activated, casting a three-dimensional image into the air above him. The scene unfolded in vivid clarity. Humans fleeing a planet engulfed in chaos. Ships soared into the skies, pursued by fire and smoke. Kane's breath hitched as he watched figures run frantically through the rubble, carrying children and supplies. The image lingered on one pair, a man and a woman, before fading into dark. "Don't touch that," Vixara's voice called sharply from the doorway. Kane spun around, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't mean." "It's not about meaning," she interrupted, stepping into the room. Her bioluminescent patterns flared slightly, a sign of her agitation. "There are things here you're not ready to see." "But they looked like me," Kane argued. "Were they my parents?" Vixara hesitated, her usual composure faltering. She had avoided showing him these archives for this very reason. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "The records I recovered were incomplete. What you saw could be anyone." Kane's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." Her glowing patterns dimmed and her voice softened. "I would not lie to you, Kane. But sometimes the truth is harder to find than you think. That's why we must search for it together." His frustration lingered, but he said nothing more. As she guided him out of the room, Vixara couldn't help but feel that the gap between them was growing wider. He was no longer the helpless infant she had saved. He was becoming something she didn't fully understand. That night, Kane sat by the viewport, staring at the stars. He didn't sleep, his mind restless with questions and doubts. He couldn't shake the image of the fleeing humans, the man and woman who might have been his parent. Why had they left him? And why had Vixara chosen him, of all the lives she could have saved? The sound of her approaching footsteps drew him from his thoughts. She sat beside him, her tall, luminous form casting a faint glow in the darkened cabin. "You're quiet," she observed. "I'm thinking," he replied without looking at her. "About what?" He hesitated, then turned to face her. "Do you think I'll ever find them?" Vixara considered his question carefully. "Perhaps, but finding them may not bring the answers you want." Kane frowned. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes the past doesn't give us closure," she said gently. "It gives us more questions, more pain. What matters is what you do with what you find." He looked back at the stars, his expression conflicted. "Then why search at all?" "Because the journey shapes you," she replied. "Even if the answers are incomplete, the act of seeking them teaches you who you are." Kane didn't respond, but her words seemed to settle over him, his shoulders relaxing slightly. They sat in silence for a while, the quiet hum of the ship filling the space between them. The next day, Vixara took him to the training room, a circular chamber designed for luminal adaptability exercises. She programmed the room to simulate various planetary terrains, rocky cliffs, dense forests, and even low-gravity environments. "You need to prepare," she told him as the room shifted to mimic the jagged terrain of a desert world. "If you wish to explore the galaxy, you must be strong." Kane nodded, determination replacing his earlier frustration. He climbed the simulated rocks, his small hands gripping tightly as he pulled himself upward. When he slipped, Vixara caught him effortlessly, her glowing patterns flickering with approval. "Again," she said, her voice firm but encouraging. By the end of the session, Kane was exhausted, but smiling, his earlier doubts momentarily forgotten. Vixara watched him with a mix of pride and trepidation. He was growing stronger, more independent. But with that growth came the inevitable realization that he might one day leave her. As Kane drifted to sleep that night, Vixara sat beside him, her bioluminescent patterns dimming to a soft, protective glow. She knew the time would come when he would demand to know more about his past, and when that moment arrived, she would face it with. For now, she was content to let the stars hold their secrets a little longer. The docking bay of Haven Station roared with activity. Ships of every size and shape floated in suspended hangars, their hulls emblazoned with colors and markings that told stories of trade routes, allegiances, and wars. The faint hum of engines blended with the cacophony of voices, alien dialects overlapping like discordant music. The air buzzed with an electric energy, both chaotic and vibrant. This was a crossroads of opportunity, but also of joy. Kane followed Vixara down the ship's ramp, his small frame dwarfed by her elegant, glowing form. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted subtly, displaying the calm, composed rhythm of a seasoned luminal. Kane tried to mimic her poise, but the sheer volume of the place overwhelmed him. He clutched the strap of the small bag slung over his shoulder, his knuckles whitening. "Stay close," Vixara instructed, her voice low but firm. "This place is a mixture of refuge and recklessness. Trust no one unless I say otherwise." Kane nodded, glancing nervously at the crowd. He couldn't help but notice how the stares followed them as they walked. The station was home to dozens of species, scaled racons, feathered mixari, gelatinous orthan, and more, but Kane and Vixara's glowing violet-toned figure was a marvel even in a place of such diversity. But it was Kane who drew the most attention. "Is that a human? I thought they were extinct." What's a luminal doing with one of those? The whispers followed them like shadows. Kane's face burned, his hands tightening into fists. He looked up at Vixara, searching for reassurance, but her expression remained neutral, her stride unbroken, her calm unnerved him. Didn't she care what they said? "Why don't you say something?" he whispered, his voice tight. Vixara's glowing eyes flicked toward him, her tone as steady as her stride. "Because their words hold no power unless you give it to them." Kane frowned, the answer unsatisfying. He clenched his fists harder, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface as they entered the central concourse. The main concourse was a marvel of alien engineering, a circular atrium surrounded by towering columns that pulsed faintly with light. Above them, a holographic starfield stretched across the domed ceiling, its constellations shifting in real time. The floor buzzed with life. Merchants hawked wares from floating stalls, diplomats debated in raised voices, and travelers haggled for passage on outbound ships. Vixara's destination lay at the heart of the concourse. The enclave of Accord, a neutral space where interstellar negotiations took place. Kane followed her as they approached the enclave's entry, a wide archway guarded by two towering sentinels, their armor glinting under the artificial sunlight. The guards regarded Vixara with a nod of recognition, but cast a wary glance at Kane. "What's the human doing here?" one of them asked. "He is under my care," Vixara replied simply. Her tone held no defensiveness, no room for argument. The guard hesitated but stepped aside, allowing them to pass inside. The enclave was quieter but no less imposing. The space was circular, with floating platforms arranged in a wide ring. Delegates of various species occupied these platforms, their forms illuminated by the soft glow of the enclave's central light source. At the very center, a raised dais awaited Vixara. As they stepped forward, murmurs rippled through the room. "A human here. Unthinkable. Bold of the luminal to bring such a liability. Perhaps foolish." Kane's face flushed, his frustration mounting with every passing second. He glanced at Vixara, expecting her to address the whispers, but she remained silent, her bioluminescent pattern steady. The calm she exuded only made his anger flare hot. Vixara stepped onto the dais, her tall frame radiating an effortless authority. She addressed the assembly, her voice resonant and composed. "Esteemed delegates, I seek access to the ancient archives housed within this station. They contain information crucial to the survival of a vulnerable life." The speaker for the Vraken Coalition, a reptilian figure with glinting emerald scales, leaned forward on its platform. Its voice was a low, sibilant hiss. "By vulnerable life form, you mean the human?" "Yes," Vixara said simply. The Vraken's lips curled into a sneer. "Humans are not worth preserving. They have brought only chaos to this galaxy." Kane couldn't hold back. "I'm standing right here," he shouted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You talk about humans like we're monsters, but you don't even know me." The room fell silent, every gaze turning toward him. Vixara's bioluminescent patterns flared briefly before dimming again, her expression unreadable. Kane felt the weight of their stares pressing down on him, but he didn't back away. His heart pounded, but he met their gazes head-on. The Vraken let out a sharp laugh, bold words for one so insignificant. Before Kane could respond, Vixara stepped forward, her glowing patterns shifting into a brighter hue. "This child survived a war your coalition failed to prevent," she said, her tone cold and precise. "Do not mistake his presence for insignificance. He is proof of resilience, something this galaxy..." The meeting concluded without a clear decision, leaving Vixara and Kane in limbo. Back in their temporary quarters, Kane paced the room, his frustration bubbling. "You didn't let me defend myself," he said, turning to face her. "How am I supposed to prove them wrong if you keep speaking for me?" Vixara's glowing eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "Defending yourself is not about shouting the loudest, Kane. It is about showing them what you can do." Kane frowned. "And how am I supposed to do that when all they see is a human?" Vixara approached him, kneeling so she could look him in the eye. "Then show them what being human truly means. Prove their prejudices wrong, not with words, but with action." Her words hung in the air, heavy but undeniable. Kane looked away, his jaw tight, but he didn't argue further. The next day, Kane wandered the station while Vixara prepared for a second meeting. He found himself in the bustling marketplace, its stalls overflowing with alien artifacts, glowing orbs, and strange foods. The noise was deafening, but Kane moved through it with a determined focus. As he turned a corner, he saw a small alien child, an orphan, its gelatinous body quivering, cornered by a group of larger, more intimidating figures. They laughed as the child cowered, knocking over a crate of shimmering crystals in its... "Stop it." Kane's voice rang out before he even realized he'd spoken. The bullies turned, their sneers dissolving into mockery when they saw who had interrupted. A human. One of them jeered. "What are you going to do? Cry at us?" Kane's heart pounded, but he didn't back down. "You're the ones picking on someone smaller than you. That makes you pathetic." The leader's sneer faltered, replaced by a scowl. After a tense moment, he shoved the orphan child toward Kane. "Take it then. Not worth the trouble." Kane helped the child to its feet, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Are you okay?" he asked. The child nodded, its gelatinous form trembling slightly. "Thank you," it said, its voice soft but sincere. When Kane returned to the quarters that evening, Vixara noticed the change in his demeanor immediately. He seemed taller, his posture more confident. "What happened?" she asked. Kane shrugged. "I showed them," he said simply. Vixara's bioluminescent patterns brightened faintly, a sign of approval. She didn't press for details. She didn't need to. Kane had taken his first step toward proving himself, and for now, that was enough. As they prepared to leave Haven Station, Kane glanced back at the bustling concourse one last time. The stares and whispers no longer felt as heavy. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was someone worth seeing. The starship glided through the outer rim of the Varian Veil, a vast expanse of swirling energy and fragmented debris that separated charted space from the unknown. The hull hummed softly, resonating with the rhythm of its engines as Vixara and Kane prepared for the next phase of their journey. Vixara stood at the console, her bioluminescent patterns glowing faintly, reflecting her deep focus. Kane, now older and taller, leaned over a nearby display, studying the map of their destination, the Alliance Summit, a rare gathering of species to discuss matters of peace, trade, and survival. Kane tapped the screen. "Why would they invite us if they don't trust humans?" His voice was calm but tinged with doubt. Over the years, he had grown more thoughtful, his emotions tempered by experience. Vixara turned toward him, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Because trust is not a prerequisite for progress. The summit is an opportunity. Some will see it as a chance to form alliances. Others will see it as a test." "For me," Kane said, his voice low, "to see if a human can behave or excel," Vixara corrected. "What matters is how you choose to act. Prejudice does not define you unless you allow it to." Her words settled over him like a weight, one he carried with quiet determination. He straightened, his jaw tightening. "What's the plan?" She gestured to the starfield outside the viewport. "We go to the summit, and we show them what humanity is capable of." The Alliance Summit floated in the heart of the Lyran expanse, a region of space bathed in shifting hues of blue and gold. The summit itself was housed within a sprawling structure, its architecture a masterpiece of collaboration. Curving luminal spires blended seamlessly with the angular designs of Vracan engineers, the organic forms of Orthan architects, and the crystalline latticework of Myxari artisans. The entire structure radiated unity, though the beings within were anything but harmonious. Kane and Vixara entered the central hall, a cavernous space filled with representatives from dozens of species. The air buzzed with tension as delegates debated, their voices rising and falling in sharp bursts. Kane could feel the weight of the room's attention shift toward him and Vixara. The moment they stepped, "A human," someone muttered. "Is this a joke?" Kane clenched his fists, but kept his expression neutral. He had learned to let the whispers wash over him, to focus instead on proving them wrong. He followed Vixara to their assigned platform, where the council's primary speaker awaited. The speaker, a tall, regal Mixari, with plumage that shimmered like liquid gold, inclined their head toward Vixara. "Luminal representative, your presence honors us. But bringing a human to such a delicate negotiation, was that wise?" Vixara's glowing patterns brightened slightly, her calm voice carrying an edge of defiance. "Wisdom is measured by the outcomes it produces, not the biases it challenges." The Mixari tilted their head, their feathers shifting colors as they considered her response. As the summit progressed, Kane observed from the sidelines while Vixara engaged with the other delegates. Discussions ranged from trade agreements to defense pacts, but one topic dominated the room: the growing instability of the galactic rim, where rogue factions had begun raiding settlements. Some called for a united military force, while others argued for isolationist policies. "It is humanity's chaos spreading again," a Vracan delegate hissed, their words aimed more at Kane than the room. Their wars left scars that still bleed. Kane stood abruptly, drawing the attention of the assembly. He stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Blaming humanity for the galaxy's problems is convenient, but it solves nothing. The raiders don't care about species. They care about control. Division only makes us weaker." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Kane felt his pulse quicken, but he held his ground, meeting the stares of the delegates head-on. The Mixari speaker regarded him thoughtfully. A human speaking of unity, unexpected but not unwelcome. Later that evening, Kane wandered the quieter halls of the summit, his thoughts heavy. The debates had revealed deep fractures among the species, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his presence only exacerbated the tension. He found himself in an observation chamber, its glass walls offering an unobstructed view of the Lyran expanse. Doubts again. Vixara's voice cut through the silence. He turned to see her standing behind him, her glowing patterns soft and steady. She joined him at the window, her tall frame radiating quiet strength. "They hate me," he said finally. "No matter what I say, no matter what I do, they see a human and think trouble." "Not all of them," Vixara said. The Mixari listened. "Others will too. Prejudice does not dissolve in a day, Kane. It is worn down over time." He sighed, leaning against the glass. "What if I'm not enough?" Vixara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch both grounding and reassuring. "You are more than enough. But you are not alone. I stand with you as do others. Progress is not made by one person, it is made by many." Kane nodded, her words bolstering his resolve. He turned back to the stars, their light reflecting in his eyes. "Then let's make them see." The following day, the summit took an unexpected turn. A fleet of ships appeared on the edge of the Lyran expanse, broadcasting a message of hostility. The raiders had come, their leader demanding access to the summit or threatening destruction. Panic rippled through the delegates. Accusations flew as old grievances resurfaced. Vixara watched the chaos with a steady gaze, her glowing patterns brightening as she formulated a plan. "They will tear themselves apart before the raiders even strike," Kane said, his voice tight with frustration. "Then give them something to unite against," Vixara replied. Kane hesitated, then stepped forward, addressing the room with a boldness he hadn't known he possessed. "You want to blame humans for chaos? Fine. But blaming me won't stop those ships. You want proof of humanity's worth. Let me help stop them." The room fell silent, the delegates exchanging uncertain glances. Finally, the Mixari speaker stepped forward. "What do you propose, human?" Kane turned to Vixara, who nodded subtly, her trust evident. "We lure them into the veil," he said, gesturing to the map displayed above the room. "The debris field is dense enough to disrupt their navigation. If we coordinate our ships, we can trap them." It was a bold plan, and the room erupted into debate. But one by one, the delegates began to see the logic. Reluctantly, they agreed. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. Kane's plan worked, the raiders falling into disarray as the Allied ships executed their maneuvers with precision. For the first time, the species of the summit worked together, their combined strength overwhelming the enemy. When the dust settled, Kane stood on the observation deck, watching the remnants of the raider fleet retreat into the void. Vixara joined him, her presence as steady as ever. You gave them something to see, she said, her voice warm with pride. Kane nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Maybe they'll think twice before calling humans trouble. Perhaps, Vixara said, her glowing patterns brightening. But even if they don't, you've shown them what unity can accomplish. That is a legacy worth building. Together, they stared out into the stars, the future brighter than it had ever seemed. The vast chamber was alive with voices, a symphony of diverse tones and languages echoing off the crystalline walls. Delegates from dozens of species filled the council hall of the newly formed Galactic Concord, their faces a mixture of hope, curiosity, and doubt. Above them, a holographic display of the galaxy spun slowly, its star systems shimmering like scattered diamonds. At the center of the chamber stood Kane, no longer the uncertain boy who had once cowered under judgment. He was now a man, his posture confident, his eyes steady. His clothing, simple but dignified, bore no insignias of power or elite. By his side, Vixara stood tall, her bioluminescent glow casting a faint light that seemed. The council murmured as Kane prepared to speak, his presence still a source of contention for some. Humanity's troubled past had not been forgotten, and many in the galaxy still questioned his place among them. Yet it was his voice they had summoned, his leadership they had come to respect, reluctantly or otherwise. Kane took a deep breath, his voice cutting through the noise with calm authority. We stand at a crossroads, he began. Our galaxy has suffered. Wars, greed, and mistrust have driven us apart for centuries. But division has never protected us. It has only made us vulnerable. The room fell silent, his words resonating. Kane's gaze swept the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had once dismissed him as insignificant. When the raiders attacked, we didn't fight as humans, Luminal, Vrekan, or Mixari. We fought as allies. That unity saved us. It showed us what we can accomplish together. He paused, letting the memory of their shared victory settle in. But unity isn't built in battle alone. It is forged in understanding, in the choices we make to see past our differences and work toward a shared future. A Mysari delegate leaned forward, their feathered plumage shimmering with intrigue. And what of humanity's past? They asked. The destruction your people wrought cannot be ignored. Kane met their gaze without flinching. You're right, he said simply. Humanity's history is a warning. We made mistakes, terrible ones, but we also learned from them. I am not here to erase the past. I am here to ensure we don't repeat it. His honesty surprised the room, softening even the most skeptical expressions. Vixara's glowing patterns shifted into a steady rhythm of quiet pride. Later, as the council deliberated in private, Kane and Vixara stepped into the quiet expanse of the Concord's observation deck. The galaxy stretched before them, a sea of stars and endless possibilities. Kane leaned against the railing, his hands gripping the smooth metal as he let out a long breath. Do you think they'll accept it? He asked. The charter? The idea that we can all work together? Vixara stood beside him, her tall frame exuding calm. Some will, others will resist. Change is rarely swift or easy. Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars. It's strange. For so long, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Now I feel like I belong everywhere. Vixara's glowing eyes softened. That is because you have made yourself a bridge, Kane, a connection between worlds. Few can claim such a role, and fewer still can endure its weight. He turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I only managed it because of you. You taught me everything. Her expression grew serious, her glow dimming slightly. No, Kane, I showed you the way, but you chose to walk it. This journey is yours. As the two stood in companionable silence, the door to the observation deck hissed open. A Vrekan envoy entered, their scaled form shimmering under the soft light. They bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that startled Kane. The council has reached a decision, the envoy announced. They have approved the charter. The Galactic Concord is official. Kane exhaled sharply, relief mingling with disbelief. They actually did it. They recognized the strength of your vision, the Vrekan said, and your actions. It is rare to see such conviction in one so young. Kane nodded, his gratitude evident, but tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. The envoy departed, leaving him alone with Vixara once more. "You did it," she said, her voice warm but measured. "We did it," Kane corrected. "This was always about more than just me." The formal signing of the Galactic Concord took place in the Hall of Unity, a newly constructed chamber designed to symbolize the collaboration of the galaxy's species. Kane was given the honor of presenting the final draft of the charter, his name etched into its digital panels alongside Vixara's. As the assembly watched, Kane addressed them one last time. "This is not an end," he said. "It is a beginning. A fragile one, but every alliance starts as fragile. What matters is how we nurture it, how we choose to grow stronger together." The delegates responded with quiet applause. Some enthusiastic, others reserved. Kane didn't need unanimous approval. What mattered was that they had taken the first step. Later that night, Kane and Vixara stood aboard their ship, preparing to depart. The Concord would need time to solidify, and their work was far from over. The galaxy was still a fractured place, with many challenges ahead. "What now?" Kane asked, glancing at Vixara. She tilted her head slightly, her bioluminescent patterns shifting into a gentle glow. "We continue. The Concord is a foundation, but it is only as strong as those who build upon it. There will be disputes, setbacks, but we face them one step." Kane nodded, a spark of determination lighting his eyes. "Then let's keep building." As the ship lifted off, the stars stretched out before them, vast and infinite. Kane sat beside Vixara in the cockpit, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He thought of the journey they had taken from a ruined colony to the heart of galactic diplomacy, and knew there was still so much left to do. But for the first time, the weight of his responsibility felt less like a burden and more like a gift. Together, he and Vixara had created something new, a bridge between worlds, a chance for unity. And as the stars beckoned them forward, Kane knew that their legacy was only just beginning.